Hello, fellow Lolsters. Welcome to the next episode of LOL Season 2. And today we have with us Ms. Meredith Ritchie. And we're so happy to have her here because the second season, since the start, has been a season of international contacts, international authors, and we have been blessed to, find connects from all over the world for you, the aspiring authors, to get more knowledge and to get a wider perspective of writing and creativity. And I would request Ms. Jayanti to give a formal bio of Ms. Meredith.
Meredith Ritchie has made a career in business communications, and wrote her first novel as a cure for acute empty nest syndrome, she says. And she lives in Charlotte with her husband and 2 cats, who encourage her curiosity of the forgotten triumphs of the spirit, especially those in their own backyard. That's what she describes. And I thought that was an interesting and unique introduction, and very happy to invite you, Meredith Ritchie, to LOL. And interestingly, we have another historical fiction writer, and we are going to have a fantastic, memorable time talking to you. Welcome. So, Danya, maybe you want to start?
Ms. Ritchie, we wanted to know about how we go about researching for the historical fiction, because there might be times when we have to research from, the history books or go online and research. But sometimes, like all of us know, history is still fiction. It depends the person who wrote it. How do you, go about and find out if the historical research they're doing is authentic, or how many sources do you usually look into before you finalize on this is right? This is the most authentic source.
Yes. So, you first come up with an idea, and find the correct. And my idea was I wanted to write a women's empowerment novel, historical fiction novel. So I found the time setting I wanted, and I chose the 1940s because that was World War II, and I wanted, all men to be gone, and I wanted the women to be there, in a business setting, or to be the majority in a business setting, and to see how that played out. I chose my own city because I just happened to come across this enormous plant that was in existence here for 3 years, and I'd never heard of it. I was born here. I'd lived here for most of my life, and I had never heard of it. People I asked about it had never heard of it. So it seemed like there was this really period of time where this plant was something everyone talked about, everyone knew about, and then the war ended and it just disappeared. And it literally disappeared. It's not even there any longer. So I really dug into the existence of something that is no longer in existence. And so I had to go back to newspapers, library. I actually went to DC, Washington, DC, and got a researcher card from the National Archives, which was really fun. And so dug into, there wasn't a lot on this plant. So this plant was one of thousands across the country. The US really put a lot of money, time, and effort into building these in a lot of different cities. So we weren't unusual in that. It was just unusual in its size and its safety ratings that it got. So I really started looking at the setting first after I picked the time and I picked the topic and what have you. And then I started going, when I went back to Charlotte, I tried to find people who maybe would have worked there. And it was unfortunately so long ago that I couldn't find anybody that had worked there, but I did find people whose mothers had worked there or fathers had worked there. And so I interviewed them and that really helped. And then I went to local historians. And then once I started writing it, really the fact check part of it happens throughout, because with the beta reader process and the editing process, people are constantly looking things up and going, I don't know if that would happen. Let's find other sources around that time to say, would they talk like that? Would they react like that? So that really was happening throughout the whole 4 years that I wrote it.
So the characters come first or the plot comes first in your works? And how do you develop the characters? We want to know. There are so many aspiring, authors out there who will be very interested in writing such historical works. So could you please share with us how the characters?
For me, the characters definitely came first. So
Okay.
it may be a little bit of both. I might have written, a couple of intro chapters. I applied to get into something that's called Authors Lab here locally with a nonprofit, and they really encouraged us to do character interviews. And I would encourage any aspiring writer to do that, either if not in the first part of your writing, maybe even before you write it, because you really want to know, like, what are these characters' tics? Do they put their hair behind their ears all the time, or are they constantly adjusting their glasses? That's what really makes them have this humanity to them. And also kind of when you introduce, I wouldn't say that my novel has a lot of characters, but it has maybe slightly more than average, and there's some other authors that were in my program that they had so many characters, it was just hard for the reader to keep track of them. So sometimes those little mannerisms do help, kind of monitor and help the reader track with, because it's hard sometimes to keep track of multiple names. And so those were things. I remember one of the really fun questions was, what does your character have in their purse? Or their pocketbook right now. So, what do they always carry? And so really those, digging deep questions on like, well, gosh, what would this person carry? It really made you think extra about that character and how they would, go about their day. And then you could write that in, or even if you didn't write it in, it helped the author to know that about who they were representing on the pages.
So, okay. Like it's written on your website, like it's like there's a line from the protagonist that says that the author tells her story through the characters, right? So what in you triggered that? Like, did you have like an underlying what to say, like a past or a happening experience which triggered this emotion in you to know about what women empowerment meant during those times, or was there like a personal or a professional thing that you went through that triggered this?
No, that's a great question. So in 2017, I had a job change, and I really wanted to. It gave me some time to kind of explore, well, how do women lead? And I couldn't answer that question, because a lot of the women that I had known that I had reported to, in my career up to that point, sort of led like men. And I thought, well, that's kind of silly, because we're not. And so I wanted to kind of explore that. And that was my initial hope, was to do that. And I think I did. But then it was it was kind of the dawn of the Me Too movement. And then I really kind of dove into that topic and learned some things about myself that I didn't know about. And so it's like, I think, a reader could really benefit from, knowing that. So I had some of the characters go through, those experiences. Maybe not directly, but some of the backstory was definitely represented there from the Me Too movement. So anything that I would learn about myself, I would kind of put into the book, so those were the kind of things where through the writing process, things morph a little bit. And then Black Lives Matter really came to the forefront with George Floyd here in the U.S., the murder of George Floyd. And that became my own awakening for how I was both the oppressed and the oppressor. And so that was, I put that into the book, because I thought it was an important lesson for me. and potentially, you know, the reader might feel the same. So that's really when the character of Cora, who is a Black woman and also working at the plant, she really became, and she was always going to be a character. I mean, she was always there. She was one of my character interviews, you know, from the very early start. But she really started speaking to me.
Interesting. So how much do you fictionalize? Where do you draw the line, and where are the places that you look for fictioning, fictionalizing? And do you only set your novel into that period, or are you always doing two threads covering also the contemporary? How do you do your novel?
Could you explain by two threads? Could you explain more about two threads?
Yeah, she's asking you to explain a little bit more. Her question was, is your novel entirely based on history, or do you have one thread which runs on that era and one thread which is a contemporary thread, and two threads are happening like simultaneously?
Oh, yes, like the braiding they talk about. Yes. So I would like to explore that. And maybe for my next novel, I would love to explore that, because as a reader, I really love that. And I started out as a fan of historical fiction before I ever, you know, became a writer of historical fiction. But because of that, you know, I was always, I had a career in business communications. I was a really good business writer, but I had to learn how to write fiction. I have a tremendous respect for anyone who does the creative writing process, because it is very different than business writing. It is very intentional words, where business is, you know, the most number of words wins kind of thing. So that I really had to learn. And so I had to narrow down what I had to learn. And so I did sort of simplify it. Like, this is going to be a chronological novel written in third person close. And you know, because the point of view process, just deciding on which point of view you're writing in, is a very daunting process to a new writer as well. So I really picked the easiest one to write. And it's one I kind of, because it's kind of like watching a movie with your characters playing out when you're writing it. So that fit well with how my brain works anyway. So I did that, but I would like to at some point write in two different time frames, and then show, you know, maybe even showing, because I think that history constantly repeats itself. And so I think it's interesting to see that happen and lay that out for the reader, and to know that, you know, everything that happened in the past wasn't always rosy, and everything that's happening today isn't always, you know, doom and gloom. So I think there's kind of a yin and yang, and a thing that we can learn about the past, but also about our present.
You just said it's like watching a movie. Are you planning to take your work for screen? Have you tried?
I would love it. Do you know anybody who call me, meredithritchie.com? Yeah. I would love that. I mean, I've had several people say that, you know, to me, but, you know, I went with a small press, you know, to publish it. It's had really good, you know, local success. It's growing. The numbers are getting good, but I think I'm going to have, you know, a little more growth to get maybe the attention of somebody great to do that. But I would love it.
When was that published, Meredith?
Oh, just in January.
Okay. Yes. Best wishes.
So, and because your book is written from two points of views, like 2 points of view, like one from Maggie Sloan's and the other from Cora, right? Which is one from must be like I think one is Miss Maggie must be a white woman, and the other one is an African American. So usually what happens is it's the same. It's basically the same thing that both of them are looking, but having different reactions and emotions towards it. How does ethnicity play a role in that difference of, you know, points of view, do you think?
Yes, it made every difference. And it's funny. So I actually had them meeting in a library. So they're both bibliophiles. They both love books. They love to read books. They love to talk about books. Maggie is new to town when she comes here. So she's actually was born and raised in Boston, and she met her husband there. He was in the Army, and they decided to settle in Boston, had a family there. And then he moves her to Charlotte right before he re-enlists after the war after the US entered the World War II. So she's doesn't really know anybody in town, and they meet at the library. They connect over books, and she hates all the bridge games that the women play in that time, and she was getting invited to those. She wanted to read books and talk about books with somebody, and so the woman that she met that was willing to do that with her was Cora, and so they formed a relationship. And so they'd read the same book. And I think that's so interesting and applies so much today. You read the same thing and you can see two different things. So you always carry your experience with you. And then you get to, but then if you talk about that and if you share your different views, especially if they're in conflict with one another, then you get to, both learn something new that you didn't know before. And so they do that for almost a year. They do that, and then they start to work together. So they form a friendship around books, and they do have some of those hard conversations. But then after they come to work together, even more difficult things get thrown their way, and they really have to navigate those waters in the fact that they have two different lenses. When they encounter those challenges. Mm-hmm. I don't want to give too much away, but yes.
Mm.
Okay. So, and this is one thing about historical fiction that the difference between that and contemporary fiction is that you have to master the accent, the lifestyle, everything. You have to go back in time and master that for you to even, put your mind to it. Mm-hmm. But because you've lived in Charlotte for a long time and you know the city, after you've researched and you've known a little bit about the history of the city, did the city look different to you at all? Like, did you see like different landmarks and think, oh, this is something, this is an epitome of that, and I'm so happy I knew about it, or something? Did the city present itself in a different light to you after you knew the history of the city?
Absolutely, yes, 100%. And so I had an old map that I found from 1942, and it was when the population of Charlotte just, it was, most towns in North Carolina were still small towns, right? So it was still more rural than it was urban. And so, but because of World War I and World War II, more people in these defense jobs that came in, it brought more people from the rural setting into the urban setting. So in 1942, the city had just gone over 6 digits. So it just had like 102,000 people in it. Mm-hmm. And the plant employed 10,000 people. So that was a big deal. And so I have this very small map. It's not small, but when you look at it compared to what Charlotte is now, we have over 1 million people. Then they, just knowing where things were in the city, the footprint of the city. So that map would help orient me to where I was. And then, I guess knowing the time period and like what happened in the city at that time, I kind of fell in love with a neighborhood that no longer exists called Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. So that's where Cora is from. She lives in the former Brooklyn, and really it was a thriving Black neighborhood here that just was a wonderful community. They had 1,400 homes and 250 businesses, and I had no idea it was that big. And so once I started really looking, I kind of knew I wanted Cora to be from Brooklyn, but then when I went in and did the research, I was like, wow, this is completely different than what, just from passing. Like I'd never really researched it prior, but my assumptions about Brooklyn were very incorrect. So I had to correct that in my own self, and then, and then represent that community as the thriving community that it was. And so, and then watching Maggie, you know, look at it for the first time, because Maggie had a car, Cora did not. And so she would go and pick her up there occasionally and feel like kind of a fish out of water, but it was interesting. So, and that neighborhood is no longer here. It was torn down in the 70s through urban renewal. So that was sad.
What's the time frame of your novel?
1943 is when it opens, summer of 1943. And then it pretty much closes on the 3rd anniversary of Pearl Harbor, which would have been December of 1944. So really just about a year and a half. But there is an epilogue that goes into October of 45.
Okay. Oh.
And
how big is the novel, Meredith? How many pages in print form?
It is about 344 pages, I think.
Mm.
Here it is.
Quite a big one.
Yeah.
So, and because it has a different defense background, like though war is not in the forefront, it still has, like, it will still have mentions of the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
And because you said you talk a lot about this company or industry, you would have had to research a little bit about the labor laws of that time, the industrial regulations of that time, and the waste that particular industry was giving out and the effect it had on the community, and also a little bit about the equipment that were used in those wars and what effect that had on the people. So how did this research, I mean, the other, like you said, because you had done the research for character development through people, through analyzing people, but this you should have had to have gone through like some books might tell you about this, but how did you get into that, that laws, and how did that research go about?
Yeah, unfortunately, there weren't too many pictures of the actual facility that they worked in. But I did talk to several historians who knew what they did, knew maybe how they did it. There was a big push for workers. It was called, everything had a poster. That's why it's called Poster Girls, right? There's a poster for everything. And a lot of the little sayings rhymed, so there was one called Loose Lips Sink Ships. And so they weren't supposed to talk about what they did, outside of that, because you didn't know who was a spy and you just didn't know what you didn't know. And so they really pushed that on people, like, we don't talk about it. I think that was how it got to be forgotten, because they were so used to not talking about it. And once the war ended, they were just happy to go back. Well, somewhat happy, to go back to the way it was. They were happy the war was over, put it that way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I did have to do a lot of digging into what they were building and maybe how they were building it. And some of that I did have to piece together, because it wasn't, there were some newspaper articles on it, and I certainly went from those. But they built 250 buildings. So it was on 2,200 acres, which is a very large footprint for a plant. And they had over 250 buildings. And I wondered why they built so many buildings. Why not build, a larger, one big one? And it was because they assembled the shells there. So it was about, I don't know, in meters, I don't know what this is, but about 18 inches long. So it was long, at least as long as my arm, right? is the ammunition they did. And it was about 40 millimeters wide. And they were shot off of Navy ships. And a lot of times they were shot to shoot down planes that were coming in, maybe to harm those ships. And so they didn't actually make anything there. They just assembled them. But what they did was they filled these shells with gunpowder. So it was very dangerous what they did. And that's why they built so many separate buildings, because if one building caught fire, then they could contain it better if they were separate buildings. So, which is really a scary thing, right?
Absolutely.
It's not my building that catches fire and I'm sacrificed, to save everybody else. So I really kind of crawled into that, knowing that what they did was quite dangerous. And we were
to be working there is a nightmare. I think.
Yeah. I don't think it was it was bad working conditions or whatever, but just the constant focus on safety and the reason you had to focus so hard on safety is because this could catch fire at any point. We are surrounded by gunpowder.
I like being in the war front, maybe.
Yes. It's not right now. Even today, this is like usually historical fiction meant wars or territories or kingdoms and stuff. And right now, the focus has finally shifted onto the people who were left behind, like the women and the children. Like none of us even like no books even or any authors or writers even thought in that perspective. But right now at this juncture and with Ukraine and Russia going to war, it's become more obvious that the pains of the people in the war is not any different from the pains of the people at home. So there's no difference between all of them have anxiety. All of them don't know when they're going to be killed. No one's life is assured. At least the person in the war knows that there is a bullet coming towards him, while a person at home doesn't even know that. They don't know. All their fates are still not, for sure. So, were there, projections of that in your novel? Did you have to write about that anxiety or the fear of people at home?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think you're spot on in terms of there's not. Most of the World War II historical fiction that I had read was based in Europe, where they were going through very different challenges. There were bombs that were hit. You're walking down the street, didn't know if you would be, a bomb would come out. Bomb shelters. We didn't really have those. We didn't have that threat, but it was the not knowing,
Yes.
and it was the absence of, because Hawaii had been bombed by the Japanese, and we didn't think that could happen because we didn't think, because it was the airplane technology or the flying technology was just on the cusp of, for distance flying. And so, we didn't know. I mean, the Germans are wonderful engineers, and they could have made something that could fly, across the Atlantic and hit the East Coast. So, we had blackout curtains every night, the light in, so you weren't allowed to, there were all these protocols that were supposed to make you feel safe, but they also were very scary, like what, so you couldn't put your headlights on in your car after a certain time. And it was because they didn't, if there was a bomber that came, they didn't want them to be able to see, at night and to see where the cities were. So, quite frightening. And I imagine quite frightening for children. Most of the people I talked to at the time were just like the unknowns were even worse than the knowns. So exactly what you said, Sri. So that, I wanted to focus on that. And of course, Maggie, she's married to a man who thought that this war would be over a lot sooner than it was. And, had this whole, 18-month plan. They in America really did think, which is not much of a surprise, that it would come in there and, 2 years tops, we're in and out, we're good. And that did not take place. And so they were adjusting to that. And the challenge as an author was I had to make Charlie come to life, and he wasn't there. So I had to put in a lot of memories of Charlie, who is Maggie's husband, into the novel in order to be present at all. I mean, there's sort of a love triangle that exists. And one of my early editors said, yeah, you've got a love triangle with one of them is a cardboard cutout. Like you really need to deepen, who he is, even though I had interviewed him and I had asked him, some, when I, the character, and I asked him some really, deep questions, but, it was difficult. So I had to go back there and add in memories and things about Charlie so that the reader would, kind of be rooting for him as well. So
I'm interested in knowing more about this character interview. You just said I spoke to him and you corrected yourself, the character. You see, so I really am interested in knowing more on that. Please, what do you do in this character interview?
Oh, yes. Besides like what's in your purse and what, yeah, you really try to get into their emotions. Like, describe a time when you were really afraid. Describe a time when you had a sense of pride, that like an accomplishment, that kind of thing. And then, you sort of, there were times when I would go back to those interviews, especially when I was getting to like I said, I wrote chronologically, but there were some scenes and that I had to kind of push through or that weren't coming right away. And so I did kind of skip over those. And so I wrote kind of around those. And when I would get stuck, and I would often, I would go back to some of those character interviews and I would almost forget what I put down there. And oh, that's right. Okay. So I'm going to put that in there. And sometimes it would become a scene even, or memory.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So those are valuable, very valuable.
So do you come in your novel, since you talk with your characters, do you come as Meredith in your novel? It's somewhere in the same name or as a character, as an interviewer?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, some of my own experiences are in there. And it's, I probably relate the most to Maggie and Billy, who's another one of the white characters, just in my, understanding of the world and what they have learned or what they learned in the book, and then what I have learned as well. So that does come through some.
Interesting.
And when it comes to historical fiction, we have this limitation of, because you cannot fudge the facts, you have to keep the facts right. Sometimes your creative freedom is, curtailed by that. Now the facts will stop you from creating a little bit more than what is necessary, or you cannot let your mind run wild like you can for a contemporary fiction. Do you think that aids in the writing, or do you think it's actually a limitation for a historical fiction writer?
I felt like it was, and again, this was a new process that I was taking on, right? So for me, it kind of was a sense of security. Like I had my parameters, I couldn't go beyond that. And so all I had to do was add in the emotion, which I think is what makes historical fiction come alive for me, because, I was a business major. I liked math, I like numbers. So I never liked history books very much. Apologies to any historians out there, but just the content, the way they had to write was just too dry. It didn't tell the story behind it. So like, to give you an example, there's a quote that says, if history was told in the form of story, we would never forget it. So and history books have to take out the story part. They have to take out the emotion part. They have to take out the names and the people that we can all relate to, because we are named people with emotions. So that's why I love historical fiction, is because it adds that back in. But it does it in a certain time frame and setting. And I've actually found that kind of comforting, not limiting.
So I think we can log out and log in again, so that the next question will not be cut. The next question that we wanted to ask you was, how did social media help in promoting your book, or did social media help? Because right now, with the pandemic and all our communication, everything, every promotion ever that's been happening in the past 3 years has been entirely through social media. So how did that help in promoting your book?
I think the model that I have, and my publisher and I have decided to go to, is sort of like a ripple effect. So because it is, a local story, although I think, the fact that it's a US based story, that will do well internationally, because I think internationally people are curious about our crazy country and what makes us act like we do sometimes. And so I think that may be of interest, but right now, it's, been 2 months since I launched it. So, or we launched it. And so we're really trying to focus on, getting the local story out there, having it grow sort of organically, having that, the word of mouth, happen. And then, then the numbers will get big enough so that we are looking at it, potentially, might get more national attention and global attention. But, like anything, it's really hard to go, unless you go with a major publisher, which I did not. It's really hard to get that marketing push, attention. It's just such a crowded market. It really, really is. So, I tried some really cool things that did work, not necessarily through social media. I just, I don't know, I find social media kind of draining personally. And so I just have, I have to keep a box around that. Like I have to have it, just very certain times of day, and I'm not, checking it all the time. And so, I just usually just go in the early mornings, and I have things maybe throughout the week that I plan to post. I'm trying to do like little snippets of, like, if you go to my Instagram page, which is Poster Girls Book, you'll see that the tiles are kind of alternating between a picture and then a quote, a passage from the book that is of interest. So trying to glean interest that way, and there's my website. So I'm checking those boxes. I don't know if it's necessarily is, getting the sales. It's hard for me. I don't want to pay attention to all the sales numbers in terms, because it can be very disheartening. And daunting. Exactly.
Yeah. So have you been doing book readings and library visits then? Yeah.
Yes. I really, and those, you kind of have, as a new published author, you kind of have to pay attention to what feeds you and what drains you. And those kind of discussions, like, talking to actual readers or potential readers, that, energizes me. Like, I love that part of it. And talking to you guys, I really do love talking about the book and reaching, potential readers this way, and just talking about my process. And then the social media is a little bit of a drain. So yes.
You said something about publishers. So your book was published traditionally, or did you go for self-publishing or hybrid?
No, I did a hybrid. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh,
so
you did a hybrid.
I really wanted to keep with, I wanted to keep more of the creative liberties or creative licensing. I really am proud of the cover of my book. You see it's all over my wall, here behind me. But I wanted to pick the title. So that was really important to me. And then this, watercolor that is the poster or the cover of the book, that is a local artist here. So I kind of became really stubborn about my own hometown. And I was like, Charlotte does have a lot. And do I really need to go to New York and find an agent or a publisher or what have you? Could I do it here? And so I explored, did research on those resources, and I was becoming very good at research by that point. And so I found them, I found the local artist that I wanted to do this watercolor. And that's a local model that she used, to pose for it. And that part, and then I used a local publisher. So the hybrid publisher I chose is based here in Charlotte. And I learned how to write fiction with a local nonprofit here. That's who did the Authors Lab that I did. And I was born here. So there was a lot of, I thought the backstory behind that was also interesting, that someone can do that. But I did not want to go self-publishing, the self-publishing route. I guess I could have, but I thought this fit that narrative a little better. And plus, it at least took there's so much to learn at every single step when you write and publish a novel. And I really was trying to minimize the not knowing part. And so that was helpful. But I got to pick the title, I got to pick the cover. I got a lot more control over that, and it got published faster as well than it would have with traditional route.
Mhm.
How did the editing process work? Like, how many drafts did you have to go through before you finalized on, like, this is it, I'm not
A
gonna
lot
revisit
of
it again?
drafts. Yeah, a lot. Yes. That's a great question. Yeah, I had no idea how much work the editing process was until I began my own journey with that. So, once you type, I think that class that I took, the Authors Lab class, that was all of 2019. And then I probably had it, I don't know, maybe 2/3 or 3/4 of the way complete or written. Like I did the NaNoWriMo, the November novel writing month. I did that. So I wrote a lot in that November of 2019, but I still hadn't typed, like the end on the first manuscript or the first draft. And so I used, I kept the same writing coach that I had established even after that class ended in 2020 or at the beginning of 2020, and who was a wonderful, wonderful coach. And I used COVID to finish it, so the world changed, overnight. And I was like, well, I'm going to make something good happen out of this craziness. And so that really got me motivated to finish the manuscript. And then once I was done with that, I submitted it to this publisher and I got a contract within 3 weeks. So that was helpful. And so
your publisher did arrange for a professional editor?
Oh, yes. Several. Yeah.
And that's good. And when did this title come in you? While writing or while you were rewriting?
No, in fact, the title really stressed me out for a while. I had a lot of really bad titles.
Okay.
What was it? Some of them were like Out of Her Shell and, Bomb something. Like they were just horrible titles. I mean, there was no, they didn't build bombs. I don't know why. Bombshells. I mean, it's just horrible titles. Awful. And then at one point I had, 2 pages of potential titles. And I thought, none of these are working, but maybe they could if I looked at them a different way. So that was kind of fun to do that. And I think there's a power in that in any decision that we make. So I took each individual word that were on those 2 pages and I wrote it down on an index card. So, so I separated all the words out, and then I went into my guest bedroom and I put them all over the floor. And so I could see all the words, like, to see, and they kind of, some of them floated up like, oh, you should explore this word a little bit more. So I picked that card up and I put every other word with it. And that's how I came up with Poster Girls. So.
So very interesting.
Yeah.
And to be having so many titles by itself is so interesting for me.
Yes.
Because I at the most 4 or 5 I have, and from there I pick.
Yes.
And so this came only after the novel was finished. This Poster Girl.
The title came after I mean, I still had it was after I got my contract with the publisher, after I had, I think I had just started the, what do you call it? It's not the copy editing, it's the arc.
Typesetting?
No, it was like it's the story part editing. So like they're giving input on the story itself and the structure of it, structural editing. So it was I think in the middle of that process. And so you have to be very close to whoever the editor is in that process, because it's really a lot of work. And I went to her and I said, hey, this is an idea that just came to me. What do you think? She's like, I love it. That's it. So.
Very good.
So,
you
can go on. I'll ask the next part.
No, you mentioned about beta readers in the beginning of our session. So do you have a close circle of friends who read and give you feedback? At which phase of your journey did you give them your manuscript to read? And did you touch your manuscript after they give their feedback? So can you share with us that process of your journey?
Yes. I mean, beta readers are so important. I had 2 rounds of beta readers, and some were very dear friends who participated in both rounds, which was very kind of them. That was a lot of time that they gave to me, and I am very appreciative of that. But I think like the first time I printed something out, which was, well before I got actually, I think both were before I got the publisher. And the one was just printed on, 8.5 by 11 sheet paper, so it was reading it that way. And then I figured out how to print out proof copies, which was helpful. And so it was in more of a kind of a book format, and it had one of those horrible titles on it, but it was great because they could write notes, in the margins. They could give, general feedback, specific feedback. If I had written a word wrong, they could give that kind of feedback. But it was really wonderful for character feedback. They would say, I really love this character, but I can't see them saying that. So, might think about changing that. I don't think that they would say that at that time. Again, I was still getting that anchoring it into that time, or at least what people's perception of that time was. A lot of people really got into the history part of it too. They would look up certain things and facts and go, oh, is that really true? And oh my gosh, it was. And so that helped. And then I had a sensitivity reader, who was probably the most important. So that was, I would never put something out there before having somebody that, especially with the African-American lens, to have that was very important to me. So, and every piece of feedback, everything she told me to change, I was like, yep, changing that, check it.
Hey, that's good.
So have you made an ebook or an audiobook of the book yet, or do you have plans of doing that?
I do have plans to do it. It is still a to-do left though. So now it's out on hard copy, soft copy, and Kindle. You can read it, or the ebook is out there on Amazon. But the audiobook that's a kind of a morphing industry too. So, you can pick just one channel to go with, or you can pick a provider that would go into all channels, right? And so you don't want to limit yourself. And I've actually seen some, I don't want to say lawsuits, but I've definitely seen some, talk about, because I'm like, I've seen one article on it. Okay, so I'm up to set that stage. But that it's really hard to tell sometimes with these subscription-based services. It's really hard to tell how much you're making from someone listening to your book. And so I want to let some of that dust settle before I really, dive into, okay, this is the right time to make an audiobook. So it does seem to be a little bit shifting.
A book was printed. How was it to hold the first copy of your book? And after these months, have you had any readers who are not known to you, but through the book you came to know the reader? And can you share with us that kind of an experience in the library or anywhere?
Yes, so definitely holding the book, for the first time was amazing. I was so in awe of it. It felt like everything everybody tells you it feels like, and it was surreal. It was a proud moment. I was happy that my kids, could see it, because this was a pretty daunting task, for their mom to undertake, and I saw it, pushed it across the finish line. So that was, one thing that I wanted to show them. They're all in college, and so, finishing something is important. I was trying to get that message across to them, and I think I did. That was fun. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting, Meredith. Yeah. Love it.
So that was the fun part. And then, sorry, I forgot the second part of you had a second part of the question in terms of, what was it?
It was the readership. Any new reader through the book, You can also share with us the best review or the worst review, the best way they read, whatever
Yeah.
you. Yes,
well, and reviews are very important, right? So, Sri asked about the social media, whatever. Well, part of social media would be, the Amazon reviews, the Goodreads reviews, things like that. The sites like even BookBub, which I haven't gotten into, but there's a lot of options that are out there. And in this review process, so most of the reviews that you get initially, and I think this is really with anybody, right, are going to be people and then start coming from people you don't know, and has been really fun to see, and they've all been very good. There were a couple of maybe 2s or 3s I got on Goodreads from people I didn't know, and that's fine. I mean, I want an honest, review. I need to get the review numbers up because I think that puts you maybe in a different category in Amazon. So that is an example of playing that online social media game. But as far as being in a room with people who've never read it, that is, or that don't know me, that have read it and loved it, that has started to happen. So I've been going to these book club and book discussions and presentations that I'm doing, and people are coming with their well-loved copies, of the book, and they're asking me to sign them, and they're talking about how much they loved it and how much they appreciated it. And that felt good as anyone would expect it to, but it felt even better than I had anticipated. So
I just have one question, and after that we can go to the next segment of this episode. So my last question is that every author has like a style, like they have this process that they follow while writing. Like you said, you have, as a whole, the book first started with the character interview, but then with regards to each chapter, what comes to your mind first? Do you first think of like an event that you want to circle the chapter around, or do you have like an ending first and then you write, you start from the end and you just write the chapter from that, or is there like a particular like this flash of a line comes in your mind and you just put that line and then write around it?
Yeah, I think and again, because I'm such a fan of movies, I think that is how that influenced my writing. So each time, so I saw every chapter as a scene, and I would, I would start kind of like above and moving down into almost like the camera is moving down.
Zoom.
Yeah, it's zooming in and describing the room and describing the weather and describing, the tension in the room or what have you. And then
it's ready for screening.
I think it would be easy to push to a screenplay, because then that's when the dialogue starts. So I have a lot of dialogue in my book, and that's just because that's how I communicate, and how people communicate their feelings, and know just a great way, I thought, to know what's happening. I did learn within my creative writing class the difference between showing and telling. So if I just give a big old long paragraph dump of information about what is going on, then the author starts to show through, and it's like the reader's like, no, I want the characters to show me that that's happening, and not have the author tell me that in paragraph form. So I really recognize the difference, or learn the difference between those two things, and try to play those out as much as possible. So yeah, so it'd be coming into a scene, dialogue between characters, and then sort of ending with what the characters learned. And I would try to, my son told me something, it's like all of your endings of your chapters are so dramatic. And I said, that's because it's stage for the next, learning, the next lesson that they're going to be learning. So yeah.
Authors cannot be authoritative. I always say they should let the characters do the part.
Right. So right. The characters should be the authority.
Yes.
So I think now it's time for the next segment, which is World of W's. World of W's is nothing but like a set of W questions, like what, when, where. Stuff.
Okay.
And if a listener was not able to sit through the entire session, or they didn't have the time for that, they could just scroll down here and listen to the gist of it, right?
Okay.
So yeah, what is your next novel and what is it about?
Sure. So I have not started writing it yet, but I'm in the sort of initial research stages. It is going to be about Tombstone, Arizona. So in the 1920s, 1930s, here in the States, and my husband's family, extended family, was very involved with that town. They lived there. So it was his great aunt, and she married a man who bought half the town. And there was another man who bought the other. Tombstone, Arizona, which Tombstone was a movie in the 90s with Val Kilmer. So very, very manly town, very vibrant town because of the silver mines. And then when the silver mines dried up, became a dying town that you see all, in the Old West kind of towns that had their heyday in the past and now are trying to revitalize the town. And that's what these two men were trying to do when they bought up a lot of the real estate. But then those two men died. And then the town ended up being owned by the two widows. So a very manly town ends up being owned 100% by two women. And so I wanted to explore that. And they're still trying to revitalize the town. And I don't think a lot of them probably like the fact that it was owned by two women, but how that all plays out. And there's a very famous, my husband's relative owned the Birdcage Theater. And that's a very famous theater. And I think it was even a brothel stairs. So I would like to kind of explore those topics as well.
I am interested.
When does that book due?
Oh, I have no idea. I don't have a contract on it yet. No, just I'm exploring it as part of, the extension of my writing process. Yes.
Then you will come after your next book, especially this one, hopefully LOL season 3. So that's lovely.
Yes.
And yeah, you can ask. I'll go next.
So what to ask? How do you? Yes, please.
Yeah. Why only historical fiction? Do you not want to branch out with other genres of fiction, or are you too comfortable with historical fiction that you want to stick with it?
I just love it too much to leave it. I don't know. I really, really like it. Although I would like, just as you said, I think at the start of the podcast, I would like to branch into braiding a present day narrative with a past to kind of show that. I do like that part of it. And whether those sets of characters are related, and are joined via maybe the same location or the same family, or yes. Two different, yeah, exactly, or they're the same age at the time that the action is going on. I just find that very interesting, and I find yes. Of what we can learn from the past is just too powerful to leave. So I don't have any interest in leaving.
Beautiful, so lovely. I'm thinking only about the town she was talking about. That's why I'm not.
You're stuck with that, and you're not able to ask. That's okay. I'll think it. I mean,
do please.
So, how different has writing for your job been from writing fiction?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So definitely have to. It's a different skill set, and I'm pretty good at shifting gears and multitasking. So I don't have an issue, going back to that. I mean, if anything, it's made me maybe a better business writer because, I'm maybe it's taught me how to use more impactful words and maybe fewer words. And with the, the short attention span that everyone's getting online, if anything that I'm saying, I want to focus on the audience, right? And writing helps you do that. But business writing does as well. So creative writing, so focus on the audience and then try to get your message out the most succinct way possible. So it's helped.
Yeah. And like you said, because usually historical fiction takes a lot of research and it takes a lot of meticulous planning. Have you been planning your writing schedule too? Like, did you have like a particular time in a day where you will sit and write no matter what happened, or did you just wing it?
No, so I would write a lot on the weekends, like usually like all day on a Saturday. And then I would write 2 hours every morning before I would log in. So, working from home. And so my routine would be, I'd wake up and I would start writing and then, and then log into my day and not touch it for another 24 hours. And usually the start of each day was going back and reading what I had written the previous day, and then usually like hating it because like you're writing it and you think, oh, this is great, this is wonderful. And then you read it the next day and you're like, this is awful, this is horrid. How did I ever think this was good? So I did a lot of that. And so I'd go back, I'd fix it. It was sort of like taking, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and just keep going that way. So it wasn't like real-time editing, but it definitely real-time story development. And a lot of times you're just trying to get words down. You're trying to get your word count up. And it doesn't, if you're trying to focus on writing the very best thing every single time, the first time, you're never going to finish, your novel. You absolutely have to just push through and even write bad stuff, and then you go back and fix it, but the story has to advance. So
you mentioned about your kids in college. So how did they receive the book? Did they read? How do they help you in encouraging your authorship?
They did, they're pretty involved in their own worlds as well, so I didn't anticipate them. I'm the encourager for them, not the other way around. But they I think they liked it. They told their friends about it, that kind of thing. But yeah, this is just something else that mom is doing that, maybe she'll finish, maybe she won't.
They didn't read?
They have read it. Yes, they have read it.
And what was their feedback?
So I have triplets, right? So they're the same age. So one of them was one of my early beta readers, and he gave me some really good feedback, but he's more of a writer himself. Okay. And then my daughter read it after it was published. And the one thing, oh my gosh, you put the quote in there. So I had this quote that was written on our, family kind of organization bulletin board. And I never took that quote off because it was my favorite quote. And I was like, if they remember anything, I want it to be this. So it was up there for like 4 years. And she's like, I can't believe you put the quote in there. I'm like, because it's one of the best life quotes ever. And I'm not going to be here forever. You need to remember that. And I think the quote is, sometimes courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the quiet voice or quiet whisper at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. So yeah,
it's not nice.
But yeah. There was a lot of eye rolling if that quote was in there. So trying to jam it down their throats.
So you can tell aspiring authors who are listening out there, if you have any tips or advice for them, and you can tell us how you felt about this entire session.
Yeah, the best advice I've been able to give aspiring writers who are trying to, they've had the idea, they've started the novel, it's just getting it across the finish line and typing the end is, just push through it. It's all a big puzzle. I love puzzles. So I love difficult puzzles. I love to, take time doing the puzzles. I become obsessed with them. This was very much like a puzzle, and there were certain pieces that they're just too hard. You can't find them. They're the same color as everything else, just so an allegory to the puzzles themselves. And so you just set those pieces aside and just don't, and then find every other piece around it. And then that, where that piece fits becomes more evident the more you push through with the other pieces of it. So So don't
Lovely
take,
way to.
yeah, so don't take
Lovely.
writer's block or what they call writer's block, or the difficulty of pushing through as the end game. It can be done. You just have to keep, even if you just write really bad dialogue, it's okay. They can say silly things, but that scene is there, and then you can write beyond that and then come back to that.
How did you feel about the session with us, and how was this entire experience for you?
I'm sorry, what experience? You
How,
cut out.
how was the session for you? Like, how did you feel about the session? Like right now, like the session.
Oh, this?
Yeah.
I loved it. Yeah, you guys are great. This is wonderful. Yes, I really enjoyed it and so appreciate the opportunity. So I love the way that you both come at it with different angles, and different experiences, and that comes through in my novel. Is we all have different strengths, and so if we were exactly the same, then 1 + 1 would equal 2. But if we have different strengths, then 1 + 1 = more than 2. So I really saw that come through in both of your styles, and how you kind of play off each other, but also you recognize each other's strengths and respect them, and it becomes a better show as a result. So
Lovely, thank you.
It was so lovely having you for the session, and we learned a lot about the places that we're mentioning, and her getting stuck to the middle is proof that she is very interested in her second work, and I've never seen her freeze like this. Even I was a little confused about why, because people have kicked her off the last all confused.
I'm still there, I'm
still in Tombstone?
I'm still there.
Why is she stuck?
Half of my mind is still there, half is here. As the session is progressing. Interesting.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
It was a very lovely session, and for the first time I saw her tongue tied and not looking over the other person.
That's great. I love it.
Nice, Meredith.
Yeah, I'm stopping the recording.
Okay.